We are in middle of Torah Tet Zayin, Torah 16 in Likutey Moharan, and it's called Rabbi Yochanan Mishtai. And what we learned about how Rabbi Nachman explains this Torah on a Gemara in Masechet Baba Batra, that Rabbi Yochanan recounts how there was once this ship that they were traveling in, and they saw from the ship, they saw this fish, humongous fish, a tremendously big fish, that lifted its head out of the water, out of the ocean, and its two eyes were like the moon. Okay, they were as big as the moon, or Rabbi Nachman explained they were compared to the moon. Why? That's what Rabbi Nachman explains, why they were compared to the moon. And there were these two streams, two rivers, that were being spouted out of the nostrils of this humongous fish. And these two rivers were like the two rivers of Syria, Surah. And Rabbi Nachman explained to us that the fish is the tzaddik. The tzaddik is called a fish, and this is a comparison Rabbi Nachman makes in a few places in the Likutei Moharan. Taking its head out of the water. What is the water? So the water is the aspect of chachma. It's the aspect of, it's an aspect of surfing the higher realm, surfing the olamot ha'elyonim. Okay, this is what the tzaddikim do. This is connected to the aspect of Oker Harim that we spoke about in Torah 15. In Oker Harim, the uprooter of mountains is an aspect in Torah learning where the tzaddik is contemplating mitbonen, right? Hisbeinenus, where the tzaddik is contemplating deep concepts in the Torah, in Avodat Hashem, concepts in connection to Hashem, in the higher worlds. And so he is surfing the higher realm, because where your consciousness is, that's where you are. And as the Baal Shem Tov taught us. And so this is what the tzaddik is doing in his deep states of dveikut. He is traveling in the Yama Chochma, in the sea of Chochma. Okay, this is an aspect of Chochma, because it's Beetle, where he's completely surrendering to the light of Hashem and just following that flow of consciousness, of divine consciousness. And so that's what the tzaddik does in his dveikut. And this is something that takes a lot of energy, and it's not something that the tzaddik can stay in constantly. It's a state that a tzaddik ascends to and then descends. It's an ebb and a flow. There is a ratzov vashav, right? The chayot ratzov vashav, a chiyut ratzov vashav, says the Baal Shem Tov. That this is something that is experienced where a person enters, a person ascends, a person goes in to this state, and then a person must come back down to recharge and then go back up to a higher level, to a deeper level. And this is constant. That's the constant, the consistent. What he's doing consistently here is ayil v'nafik, as the Zohar says. Zaka aman de ayil v'nafik. Praiseworthy is the one that knows how to enter and exit. And so that's what the tzaddik is doing. So the tzaddik is not always, the fish is not always inside the water. The tzaddik must sometimes come out of the water in order to recharge, to rest and to recharge, and then go back in. Okay, and this is the aspect, as the Rabbi Nachman, he calls it, sometimes he says, Bitula shel Torah zohi kiyuma. This is something that Chazal teaches in the Gemara. It's brought down Masechet Menachot, Tzadi Tet, Amud Aleph, and this is the aspect of sometimes when a person sets his Torah learning aside for some amount of time, that itself will preserve the Torah learning. That itself will help bring the Torah learning to a greater depth and greater strength. Okay, that's the whole aspect of Bein Hazmanim as well, in a way. And so the tzaddik his head is now out of the water. And so when the tzaddik's head is out of the water, Rabbi Nachman says his eyes are like the moon. When the tzaddik's head is inside the water, so his eyes are like the sun. Okay, that's what Rabbi Nachman is implying by saying that when his head is out of the water, his eyes are like the moon. Rabbi Nachman means to teach us the difference between the sun and the moon is whether he's in the water or out of the water. When the tzaddik descends, when the tzaddik sets aside, he sets aside his Torah learning in order to preserve it, the bitulas shel Torah, in order to be mekayim the Torah, in order to preserve the Torah, and to strengthen the Torah and increase the Torah learning. When he's out of the Torah, he's not completely out of the Torah. Even when he's out of the Torah, even when he's out of the water, out of the ocean, when his head is now coming out of the water, he is still connected to the Torah, but he's not connected to the Torah directly. He is now reflecting what's called the Roshem, he has the after effects, or he's reflecting the light from the Torah that he was connected to beforehand. And just like the moon is reflecting the light of the sun. So the sun, the experience of light that we have from the sun is a direct experience of light, and the experience of light we have from the moon is indirect. It's only a reflection. And so here too, when the tzaddik raises his head out of the water for some time, at that time his eyes are like the moon, because now the light, his experience of the light is an indirect experience. It's a reflection of the light. It's an aspect of the moon. And says Rabbi Nachman that at that time, when his eyes are like the moon, so then he taught us that there are these, the two Mashiachs. The two Mashiachs are connected to the nostrils, and this is a Torah that Rabbi Nachman says in, this was in Torah Bet. In Torah Bet, Rabbi Nachman taught us about how there is this Rucha de Fardashka. And the Rucha de Fardashka is something that he brings from the Sefer Tzniuta, from the Zohar. Sorry, not Torah Bet, it's Torah. Rabbi Nachman taught us about the Rucha de Fardashka that comes out of the two nostrils. And this is the light of Mashiach. It is Torah Bet. Okay, so he brings from Sifra Tzniuta. In Torah Bet, he brings one line from Sifra Tzniuta, which is a part of the Zohar that contains all the secrets of the Zohar. It's a sefer. It's not so long, the Sifra Tzniuta. It's 5 chapters long, and it's basically all the secrets of the Zohar are contained within these 5 chapters of Sifra Tzniuta, and it's a sefer that we have. Our tradition is, and the Zohar says that it comes from Yaakov Avinu. So, like we have Sefer Yetzirah from Avram Avinu, Sifra Tzniuta is from Yaakov Avinu, and it has 5 chapters, like corresponding to the 5 Chamisha Chumshei Torah, right? And it contains all the secrets of the Zohar are contained in this sefer. So in every word and every line, there you can write a whole library of svarim to explain the secrets of the Torah that are contained in every word and every line of the sefer. And so Rabbi Nachman in Torah Bet, he gives us one line from the sefer of Sifra Tzniuta, that is from the 2nd chapter in Sifra Tzniuta. It says there, "Minukva de pardatska masharucha de chaya de meshicha." From the nostrils, okay, nukva de pardatska is the nostrils. Which nostrils? I think it's speaking about the nostrils, so kiviyachol of Arich, of the world called Arich, which is in the Keter. From there is drawn the spirit of life, the Rucha de Chaya, the spirit of life, le Meshicha, to the Mashiach. So there are 2 nostrils, And therefore, Rabbi Nachman, and here in Torah 16 tells us that there are two Mashiachs. We all know there are two Mashiachs. And if the Sifra Ditzniuta tells us there are two nostrils, that from the nostril is drawn the spirit of life to Mashiach, and we know there are two nostrils, so we understand there are two spirits of life, and for each one of the Mashiachs. We know there's Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. And in fact, the Arizal teaches us what these two spirits of life are exactly. He explains to us what these aspects, what these worlds are, what this Ruach is, and what the names of Hashem that are in the right nostrils, what are the names of the Hashem in the left nostril. I'm not speaking about physical nostrils, obviously. We're speaking about in the spiritual realm, in the high world, in the highest world, in the world of Arich. And there's actually one of the Yichudim, one of the Kabbalistic meditations from the Arizal, one of the very, very complex, containing a lot of details. It's a Yichud that the Arizal teaches us to do when connecting to the Tzaddik. Imagine that. So it's a Yichud. In the Sefer that I have it brought down, it's about 8 pages long. Okay, so it's a very, very long Yichud, a very long meditation with a lot of steps. There are many steps. I think when I learned it, I put it into about 6 or 7 steps. Okay, so there are many steps to the Yichud, but it's called Yichud Chotem Peh. And in this Yichud, we see what the Arizal teaches us in Eitz Chaim, practically, right? Because the Yichud is like the practical application of the lessons that the Arizal teaches us in Kabbalah and in Eitz Chaim and the other Sfarim. And so we see this idea of the right nostril and the left nostril and the spirit of life and a different aspect, a different type of spirit of life, a different type of rucha dechaya in the right nostril and a different one in the left nostril. And so Rabbi Nachman is teaching us that this is the two Mashiachs. The two Mashiachs are connected to these two nostrils, Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. And all the 70 nations are drawn to the two Mashiachs. And the 70 nations drawn to the two Mashiachs, why are they drawn to the two Mashiachs? Because they want to know about Hashem, they want to learn about Hashem. That's what's going to be in the end of days. There's going to be a tremendous thirst and a tremendous hunger for that of Hashem, for Torah knowledge, for knowing Hashem, for divine consciousness, for holy consciousness. And all the nations of the world are going to be drawn to that. And who is going to be teaching that? The two Mashiachs. Okay, and so that's the two rivers of Surah that are drawn to these two Mashiachs. Surah, which is the Aramaic for Syria, the Rabbi Nachman says, is sounds like the word saru, from the word surah means to leave or to stray. Saru maher min haderech. They strayed quickly from the way of Hashem. Okay, and so these two rivers of Surah are two rivers of the idol worshippers, the 70 nations who have strayed from Hashem to idol worship. And they are drawn to the two Mashiachs to learn about Hashem. And that's why you have here these two rivers of Surah, the two rivers of those that strayed from Hashem that are drawn to the two nostrils. They're drawn to the two Mashiachs. And so that's what Rabbi Nachman taught us about the two nostrils. And now, this is where we're up to in the last paragraph in this Torah. Let's read it inside. Utrein umin. And the two nations. Who are these two nations? Utrein umin Esav Yishmael. In utrein ananim v'mechasin al ha'aynin she'en yicholim le'ha'ir tamid b'bchinat shemesh ובשביל זה צריך הצדיק לבטל את דבקותו כדי שלא יתגברו האוmin Esav וישמעאל על עיניו, ויתבטל חס ושלום חוכמתו לגמרי. אבל על ידי טרן משיחין שיפוצו מעיינותיהם חוצה, ויהפך לכולם שפם ברורה, אז יתקיים והיה אור הלבנה כאור החמה, ואז לא יצטרך להתבטל מדבקותו. So this is fascinating, what Rabbi Nachman teaches us in this final paragraph here in this Torah. Rabbi Nachman says a rule. He teaches us like this. He says that the reason why the fish has to take his head out of the water at certain times, why does the tzaddik have to sometimes set aside his dveikut? Why can't he stay in dveikut constantly? And so Rabbi Nachman says that the tzaddik has to set aside his dveikut at certain times because these two nations of Esav and Ishmael are wanting to overcome the light that is shining from the eyes of the tzaddik. Okay, so beforehand we mentioned how the 70 nations are going to be drawn to hear and know about Hashem in the end of days. But we must also know that this is constant. It is not only at the end of days. And okay, there's something here that is happening that is being that is manifested in different ways in the time of exile, in the time of Galut, and in the time of the Geul. What is happening like this? This is something we mentioned previously. Wherever there is light, the klipa the klipa is drawn to light. It's kind of like how you have the mosquitoes and the wasps that are drawn to the light in the night. Okay? When you were in camp, you always saw all the flies and they're always drawn to the lamps, right? So in the same way, this is just a metaphor, we can understand how always where there is light, holiness, the klipa is drawn to it, to steal from it, to take that away, to take it to themselves. And that's why we mentioned previously how if all the places where you find an energy source, an energy center, a center of holiness in the world, like Kivrei Tzadikim, like Me'arat HaMachpelah, like Kever Rachel, like the Kotel, all the holy places in Eretz Yisrael, we see that in the world, even in Persia, like next to where Mordechai and Esther are buried, you see that there's a mosque that is built next to them, and there's also many times you'll see also a church built next to them. And that's also a metaphor to see how the klipa is always drawn to the or. The klipa is always drawn to the light and wants to draw that energy from these energy centers, from these centers of holiness. And so in the same way, you have these two rivers of surah, of those that strayed from Hashem, that are drawn to the two nostrils. They're drawn to the two Mashiachs. They're drawn to the light of the tzaddik. And they're drawn to the light of the tzaddik because they want to steal from this energy of the tzaddik. Okay? And so we saw in the story that these two rivers are not actually, in the story that Rabbi Yochanan told us, the two rivers are spouted from the nose of the fish. And at that point, when we learned that in the previous year, we pointed out that if so, the rivers are going outward. They're not being drawn to the nose, they're going outward. And it sounded to us at that point in the Torah, it sounded to us that Rabbi Nachman was telling us that they're being drawn to the two Mashiachs, right? Rabbi Nachman said that these two Mashiachs, the 70 nations are going to be drawn, they're going to seek them and drawn to them. He says it clearly. V'nafitz maya mitrei usya. The two rivers are drawn, they're spouted out from the two nostrils of the Mashiachs, to which the idol worshippers are going to be drawn to, and they're going to seek them. V'naharu elav kol hagoyim, like it says in Yeshayahu, that the nations will flow unto him, to the Mashiach. Okay? And so that's one aspect. That's in the time of the Geula. But at the same time, there's also this idea that they're drawn to the light and they want to steal the light, They want to steal the light of the eyes of the tzaddik. They want to cover the eyes of the tzaddik. And so we need to understand this Torah in two parts. The first part is what's happening with the two nostrils, and another part is what's happening with the two eyes. With the two nostrils, we see that there's two rivers of surah, of idol worshippers, that are being drawn to the two nostrils, to the two Mashiachs. And that's in the time of the Geula. Now, in this final paragraph, Rabbi Nachman tells us that these nations of the world, the idol worshippers of the world, the 70 nations, are also covering up the eyes of the tzaddik. They are considered, in the Zohar, they're called the clouds that cover up the eyes. Ananin de mechasin al ainin. The clouds that cover up the eyes, they block the vision of the tzaddik. Okay, and why do they block the vision of the tzaddik? Because these two rivers, these two categories of the 70 nations, all the 70 nations are split up into a category of Esav and the category of Yishmael. Okay? And so these two categories of the 70 nations, the nation of Esav and the nation of Yishmael, they are the two clouds, and they're trying to steal the light of the tzaddik, and they are covering up the light of the tzaddik. They're blocking the dveikut of the tzaddik, that connection that the tzaddik is experiencing. They're trying to overpower his eyes and nullify his connection to Hashem, chas v'shalom, and steal away that light that he's experiencing. And that's the time of the exile. Obviously, that's the time of the galut. And so the two Mashiachs, what the two Mashiachs are doing is that they are sending out light throughout the whole world. And that light that the two Mashiachs are sending out to the whole world is what? What is the light that they're sending out? They're sending out divine consciousness. They're sending out da'at et Hashem, knowing of Hashem. And so when they're sending out this da'at et Hashem, this divine consciousness throughout the whole world, which is called, right, Yafutsu ma'yonotehem chutza, that their well springs will spread forth, right? When they do that, they are going to transform the darkness of the 70 nations into light. They're going to purify the 70 nations. They're going to rectify the 70 nations. And that's part of the Geula process. And by doing that, by causing that transformation, that this is the work of the Mashiach, the two Mashiachs, transforming the consciousness of the 70 nations to a consciousness of Hashem and awareness of Hashem, to connect to Hashem. Now these 70 nations are no longer going to be clouds on the eyes of the tzaddik, and they will no longer block the tzaddik from experiencing constant veikut. And so what Rabbi Nachman in this final couple of lines of this Torah is teaching us something tremendous. He says the reason why the tzaddik has to come out of his dveikut at certain times, and like the pasuk says, "V'achiyut ratzov v'shov," it's an ebb and flow. It's an entering and exiting, going in and coming back out, ascending and descending. The reason why he does that is in order not to give the opportunity to the 70 nations that are idol worshippers, that are strayed from Hashem, to overcome, to block that light and to steal from that light of the tzaddik. And that's part of the galut. But part of the geula is that we don't need to go into hiding at certain times. We don't need to hide the light and cover the light and exit from that place of deep dveikut at certain times, because now the whole world has ascended to a higher level and the 70 nations are no longer trying to block that light. They're no longer in this aspect of ananin de mechasin al einin, the clouds that are blocked, that are covering the eyes. And this is, says Rabbi Nachman, described in the Nevuah, in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, v'haya ora levana ki ora chama, in the time of the Geula, very famous pasuk, that the moon, the light of the moon, will be like the light of the sun. It will ascend, it will be lifted to the level of the sun. What does that mean? That means that there is no longer a need for the eyes of the tzaddik to be like the moon, because now the eyes of the tzaddik are constantly going to be experiencing the direct light of Hashem. experiencing the light of Hashem like the sun in a direct way, okay, which is constant deep dveikut with no need to descend and exit from that dveikut. Okay, there's maybe an ebb and a flow. Maybe there's a deeper dveikut and a lesser dveikut, a greater dveikut and a lower dveikut, and that can also be. But to completely exit from that dveikut, where his eyes are just experiencing the reflection of the sun, for fear of the 70 nations, for fear of these two rivers of surah, of idol worshippers that strayed from Hashem, that's not in the time of the Geula. In the time of the Geula, the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. The aspect of the moon will be elevated to the aspect of the sun, so that the tzaddik will be in constant veikut with no fear of these two nations. Why? Who caused that to happen? Mashiach, the two Mashiachs. And these are the two nostrils. The two nostrils will spread wellsprings of Torah throughout the world. They will spread the consciousness and the awareness of the Ribono Shel Olam throughout the whole world, and that will what's the words in the pasuk? What Rabbi Nachman brings, v'yafech lekulam safa berura, and everyone will be transformed to a pure tongue. Okay, that means that the 70 lishonot, the 70 languages, which Rabbi Nachman says in other Torahs, contain, each one of the 70 nations, their specific impurity and their specific negative character traits are contained within their language. Rabbi Nachman says in a few places in Likutey Moharan. And so when it says about Mashiach, in the time of Mashiach, that everyone, they will all be transformed to a pure language or to a pure tongue, okay, the 70 languages will be transformed to Lashon HaKodesh. That means that the 70 nations of idol worshippers, 70 aspects of straying from Hashem, will all be returned back to Hashem, purified, rectified. Again, who does that? The two Mashiachs, the two nostrils, by spreading the wellsprings of Torah throughout the whole world. And through this process of Geula, of purifying the world, of rectifying the 70 nations, of rectifying us, reconnecting us, Am Yisrael, is really, we are the messengers, the shlichim of Mashiach in the world. Okay, the Mashiach is the tzaddik of the generation. We are included in that light, and this is our job. Every one of us has the two Mashiachs within us. Rabbi Nachman says that as well in a few places in the Likutei Moharan, that each one of us has the light of Mashiach within us. And so this is something that in a way is really each one of us has the responsibility to see how can we spread the wellsprings of Torah, the light of Hashem, the divine consciousness, the Da'at et Hashem throughout the whole world. In which way can I purify the 70 languages? Okay, and so Rabbi Nachman also says in other places how each one of us has the 70 nations within us as well. Okay, and Rabbi Nachman says that represents all the negative character traits, all the midot ra'ot that a person has within themselves, within the animal self, are the 70 nations within them. Because every one of us is a small world. And Rabbi Nachman says that to the extent that a person allows himself to fall to those midot ra'ot, to those negative character traits, that's the extent that a person will be falling to the power of the 70 nations, of the galut of the 70 nations. And so when Bnei Yisrael collectively fell into exile, into the galut of the Romans or Ishmael or whatever nation it was because personally, on a personal level, many people fell to that negative character trait inside themselves, that is the aspect of Bavel or Ishmael or Esav or whatnot. Okay, and so within us, we also have the two Mashiachs. And so we have to see how to apply this Torah personally. We have to find these two Mashiachs within us. What is the aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef within us? What's the aspect of Mashiach ben David within us? And how can we spread the light of Mashiach, the light of the wellsprings of Torah throughout the whole body, so that that light influences the 70 nations within ourselves and purifies those 70 languages to a pure tongue, to Safa Brura, to Lashon HaKodesh, which means that the way that they connect and the way that they live and the way that those aspects within us will completely have a different perspective. They'll be purified and elevated and fixed okay, and healed, because the language is the perception of life. The language is the way you connect with the outside world, and it's the way that you represent the outside world to yourself on the inside. And so when the language is purified, it means that your perception of reality is purified. That's what it means, safan berura, a pure tongue. And so you have to find how each one of the 70 nations within yourself, each one of the midot routes within yourself, is really sourced in an impure tongue. It's really sourced in a lashon of Tuma, lashon of one of these 70 nations. It's a mistaken perception. It's a corrupted perception of reality that we must purify. How do we purify it? By connecting ourselves to the perception of truth, the true perception, the perception of Hashem in reality. Okay, the godly perception in reality, which is the perception of Torah. That's the wellsprings of Torah, and that's drawn from Mashiach. And when we draw that from Mashiach to fix and purify the 70 languages within ourselves, the 70 nations within ourselves, then we can also start seeing in the outside world, how can we do the same thing? Okay, and so this process of the two nostrils spreading the wellsprings of Torah throughout the whole world, purifying the 70 nations, the two rivers of Surah, the two rivers of idol worshippers that strayed from Hashem, purifying them, elevating them, fixing them, rectifying them, and transforming the world into a world of Geula, bringing the world to a state of Geula. Now the tzaddik no longer needs to disconnect from his dveikut and fall to a place of the moon. Because the place of the moon, even though it still has light, but it's nowhere close to the light of the sun, to the direct dveikut that the tzaddik experiences. And that, says Rabbi Nachman, is the meaning of the pasuk, that in the time of the Gula, the light of the moon will be increased to the light of the sun. Because now, even when the tzaddik has, we always have the ebb and flow. There's those aliyot in yeridot. Even the tzaddikim in Gan Eden, before they go to a higher world, there is some sort of lowering before there is a going up. There's some sort of descending before ascending. You can see it also in a plane. In order for it to go to a higher level, it kind of dips a little bit in order to get to a higher place. And so the tzaddik will also have the ebb and flow, will also have the descent before the ascent, but the moon will be at that point will be like the sun. The moon, the descent of the tzaddik will be also a direct experience of the light. Will be also like the sun, which is a direct experience of light. Will be also that high level of dveikut. There will no longer be in exiting, so to speak, from that dveikut, so that because of fear of the 70 nations of Esav and Ishmael blocking and covering up and stopping that light from being experienced. Okay, there will no longer be the fear of those the two ananim, the two clouds covering on the eyes. And so this Torah here is a beautiful representation, a beautiful explanation of what Mashiach is going to come to do in the world, how we can connect to it. We need to see and find how we can connect to that on a personal level, and understanding why it is that sometimes the tzaddik needs to disconnect or set aside that deep state of direct dveikut, and also it brings us a deeper understanding of what it means that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. What is that light of the Geula? What is the time of the Geula? What does that represent? It represents a constant state of deep dveikut, of direct connection to the Ribono Shel Olam. That's what's going to be revealed in the time of the Geula. And so Baruch Hashem, that's the end of Torah Tet Zayin. And Bezrat Hashem will continue the next Torah in the next year.